The most interesting guests in the music industry, entertainment, art, and politics. Step into the studio for Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
Seth Swirsky is this week's guest on Turning Point with Frank MacKay. The Renaissance man is an American pop music songwriter, author, recording artist, filmmaker, and political writer. He talks with Frank about his interests and his highly acclaimed documentary film about the Beatles. Let's listen.
And now, Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
Welcome to Turning Point. Our very special guest today from the world of the music business and author and songwriter. Am I right, Seth? Seth Swirsky.
Yes.
Seth
Thank you
Swirsky.
so much. It's an honor to be on.
Seth, I mentioned I mentioned songwriting. I believe you wrote Taylor Dayne's first hit.
Yes, I wrote the song "Tell It to My Heart" with a guy named Ernie Gold. We wrote that, for Taylor Dayne, and that became her first international hit. And then I co-wrote her following hit, her second hit, her first number one, called "Prove Your Love," with a guy named Arnie Roman. So yes, she was, the first one that put me on the charts. But I had already at that point had written for Air Supply and a number of other different acts, Smokey Robinson and the Spinners and the Four Tops and stuff like that. So I just loved writing for a whole lot of different people back at that time.
What songs did you write for Air Supply?
I wrote a song called "After All" on their comeback record in 1984, 1985, and it was, there I was, 23 years old. It was the first song I ever got on a record, and, it was my first gold record, so it was very exciting.
Now, were you working with the band, or did you write the song and then kind of submit it to the band?
Well, I was going to college up at Dartmouth College, and some of my songs got to the publisher there, Irwin Schuster at Chapel Music, which was the biggest publisher in the world.
Sure.
And then right out of college, I was signed as a songwriter, a staff songwriter. So there, I'm writing songs for all different kinds of people, and every day they would say, well, Hall & Oates is looking for a song, or Pat Benatar, or Air Supply, or this one or that one. And I just, I just loved it. I was there at a piano or a guitar. I'm mainly a guitar player, and I just said, I'm going to write this song for Air Supply. I grew up listening to them, and boy, that would really be a fun thing. And I was fortunate enough to get a song recorded by them.
You're an Ivy Leaguer. You're probably surrounded by future doctors and dentists and stockbrokers, and here you are writing songs for the music business. What was the music scene up in Dartmouth?
0 to none.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
Right? I mean, it was very cold up there, and it was a lot of, there was a lot of work to do. I'd be up all night doing papers on, the art history and the religion and philosophy and all these great things, and I very much enjoyed it. But what I would do is my mom lent me her car my whole senior year, and I drove back and forth from Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth is, down to Long Island in Great Neck, where I grew up. And it just so happens that my mother wrote a show that went off Broadway, and I wrote all the music for it, a show called Oh Baby. So I was going to school 3 days a week, and then I would get in the car during my last class and 5 hours drive down to New York City, and we would put on our show to New York City audiences. So it was a very exciting time. And I was writing jingles at that time as well. I wrote a jingle for Thomas's English Muffins, and I was splitting my life into really two worlds: the academic world, and then I'd leave right away, and I'd be in the New York City world of jingles and show writing and stuff like that. So I just enjoyed it all.
Well, let's talk about your upbringing a little bit. You certainly have an interesting past and a current interesting situation. What were you like growing up?
Well, I was interested in a whole lot of different things. My parents had me when they were 18. They were both 18 years old. And they would buy records in the early 60s of Peter, Paul, and Mary and Ray Charles and all that. And I was listening to those records when I was 2 and 3 years old. There was always music in my house. And there was just this, I was just always a creative kid. I always looked at things and wanted to make things from that. And, it comes the mid-'60s, and I'm inundated by Beatles songs. They were just coming out of every speaker of our house. Remember, my parents were very young at the time. They were buying those records at 20, 21 years old, just like you would. And I was very young. And I begged them for a guitar. It's 1966, 67, and I said, please, I want to be a Beatle.
Yeah.
You know, and they scraped together $23 to buy a Giannini guitar, an acoustic guitar, which was twice my size.
Wow.
And I just went to every guitar teacher there was in Great Neck on Long Island. And, you know, I just, before I knew it, I was playing Eleanor Rigby, and I was doing concerts at my school, Lakeville School, my grade school in Great Neck. And they would, you know, empty out the classrooms, and I would be up there, you know, all 4'5" of me, playing, you know, Hey Jude and Strawberry Fields Forever. I mean, kids today, my friends today, I should say, remember those moments, and it's very flattering, obviously, on Facebook when I get a note from them saying, I remember when you were, you know, playing, you know, yesterday on the stage at Lakeville School. So it started that way for me. I really feel as if I got the best of the 60s. And it was the colorful posters of Jimi Hendrix and the Doors and the Beatles, and yet I didn't get any of the downside of the 60s, which were, if you were older, you were worried about being drafted into Vietnam. You were worried about, should I take LSD or not?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was a lot of pressure for, you know, kids that were in, you know, in their teenage years and in their 20s. So things were changing very much. And there were a lot of pressures on young people. But I didn't get that. I got the best of it because I was younger. So I got all the color and light and music. And that's what kind of formed my own art as I got older.
What years were you in high school?
I was in high school from 74 through 78. I'm sorry. Yeah, 74 through 78. That's right. And on Long Island. So at least I got the two Yankee teams that won the World Series in 77 and 78.
Right, yeah.
Grew up loving baseball and all sports as well. The New York Islanders were a great team for me. I love Joe Namath and the Jets of 69, the Mets of 69, the Knicks of 69. I mean, all that stuff. It was a magical time to be a young person in New York growing up in that period of the late 60s to the late 70s, really. Just a fantastic time.
From the world of music, we're speaking with Seth Swirsky. Seth, when we talk about your high school times, you're an Ivy Leaguer. Obviously, it's very difficult, you know, certainly at that time and now, certainly at this time, to get into a school like Dartmouth. It's one of the 8 Ivy League schools. What were your grades like? I mean, were you the valedictorian? Were you close?
No. I was a good student, but I wasn't a great student at all. You know, I got mostly B pluses. You know, an occasional A here, an occasional B there, and stuff like that. I don't think I got, you know, I don't remember getting a C, but, you know, I just, it wasn't like academics were my thing, Frank. I loved music, and I would lock myself in my room, you know, making music as much as I possibly could because I just loved it. But I did well enough academically, and I did well on my, you know, on my SAT scores and things like that. But I really tried to appeal to them in terms of getting into that school by saying I'm not your average student. You know, I want a career in music, and I want to do other things, and I just don't want to be a lawyer or doctor, which there's nothing wrong with.
Sure.
But I think I appealed to them because, you know, I'll give you an example. For my college essay, instead of writing, you know, a whole thing on what do I want to be and all that kind of stuff, I wrote a poem. You know, it must have been 20 stanzas long, but I did it all as a lyric with rhymes. You know, so
that's interesting.
You know, yeah, I just was me. You know, I just said if I get in, great, and if I don't, okay, that's no problem. You know, life goes on. And
Seth, what was your major? What was your major in Dartmouth?
I majored in English literature. So with mostly it being American literature, Sinclair Lewis and you know F. Scott Fitzgerald and the literature of the American writers mostly.
And your vision for your future at that point? I mean, did you know? Were you just kind of like riding the wave, winging it? What was the?
It was always since I was 6 years old. It was be a Beatle. That was my major in life. And I didn't know what that was going to turn out into being. Was I going to be a songwriter? I don't know. I picked up a guitar. I had long hair when I was young, and I just wanted to be one of the Beatles. You know, was I going to be in a group? Was I going to be a songwriter? I didn't know what it was, but I certainly was also very traditional. I come from a solid traditional family that, thinks education is a good thing. And so I wasn't not going to go to college just to play in a club in New York. I wanted a good foundation as well. And I'm also fairly patient. I don't think that you have to do this by this age or, any particular thing. So I just like to enjoy it all as it's happening.
You touched on something. You said that you had the experience of the positives of the 60s because you got into music early and you kind of missed the troubled part of the 60s, with the protests and the being drafted and so forth. And you ended up growing up in this generation from 74 to 77, let's say, in high school, that really was like a tweener. You were like, between the 80s, which became very corporate, and the 60s, which was, anything but. And you're one of, one of that generation that really had an interesting perspective on life. You saw what happened in the, with the hippie generation, quote unquote hippies and the yippies and so forth. And then you're just prior to, the corporate world. How much of that plays into what you've done since?
It's a great question. I grew up wanting to write Sgt. Pepper, okay? And when I got into the music world in the 80s, I was in a world where you had to write songs, if you were going to write for other recording artists, that had to be not corporate, but a little bit, you couldn't be as creative as writing songs like that. No one was going to record them. And so I had hits with songs like Tell It to My Heart, as you mentioned, with Taylor Dane, and people remember that. It's all very flattering, and it was tremendous to be on the charts, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't quite what was in my heart, because I really wanted to write, Beatle-type songs. Well, as it turned out, that's what my job was. As a staff songwriter, I got to write for a whole lot of different artists, but it wasn't quite the same songs I had grown up listening to. So I had to, I had to kind of tailor my writing a little bit to kind of get with a certain style. There was still, melody still was king, I think, in the 80s. I think that was very, very important, and that's what I took from the 60s. But cut to the early 2000s when I decided to be a recording artist myself, and I made my first solo record, Instant Pleasure. And then I also have a project called The Red Button, of which I record with another guy under the name of The Red Button. And these albums that I'm making are very much in the line of what is really in my heart as a recording artist.
Now, what type of labels? I didn't mean to cut you off, but what type of labels are these recorded on and released on?
Well, I have my own label, Grimble Records. And we sell them, through the internet, through my website, Seth.com or theredbutton.net. And I'm just telling you, we don't try to copy the Beatles or anything like that. It's not a Ruddles type thing. It's not a wink, wink, like, oh, look what we can do, or, we're having fun with it. These are the songs that I've recorded with the Red Button or on my solo records. My last one was called Watercolor Day last year. These are the songs that I really want to write, and they're 2.5-minute pop songs with 3 choruses, and they're my most creative work as a recording artist, as a songwriter, I should say. I couldn't necessarily write these songs in the 80s for the recording artists I wrote for Celine Dion or for Tina Turner, those kinds of artists. They were looking for a specific thing. So your question is interesting in the fact that I grew up in the 60s with a real feel of it was all about melody and short songs and albums that every song moved you. Every song, you couldn't pick the needle up, and then you got a lot of that in the 70s too, but it got a little bit more corporate in the 80s when I hit the world as a songwriter. But I picked up that whole thing again in the 2000s when I became a recording artist, as a solo recording artist and with my band, The Red Button. I'd like you to hear some of that stuff, and I think you'll understand what I mean.
I would love it. How much touring are you doing with the Red Button?
Well, we did a couple of gigs in Europe, and we've done some things out here in L.A., but I have so many projects going at any given time that we just haven't, I don't have the time to actually do a big tour, although we get offers all the time. our first record came out in 2007. It's called She's About to Cross My Mind. And I'll tell you something. I know, people don't know numbers or anything like that, but we sold 25,000 albums off my website.
Well, that's tremendous. That's tremendous.
It really became a sensation, and I hate to say that about my own work. I don't mean it in any kind of like we think we're so great. It was more like people were hungry for songs that had melody after melody after melody. We got very much what, we wanted to make a record that we would listen to and not, quote unquote, pick the needle up. And it got in all the year-end polls of all these blog sites and of all these places, we were chosen number one. And little Steven picked it up on his underground radio and made it the coolest song of the year. Our song from that record, that was the single, if you will, was called Cruel Girl, Cruel, Cruel Girl. And you could watch it on YouTube if you plug in Cruel Girl and the red button. And you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of sound and feel. It really has that kind of, that feeling of this is short, it's got a lot of hooks in it, and that's what the whole record is.
We're speaking with Seth Swirsky, and again, from the world of music. And, a lot of people, when I mentioned I'm going to be interviewing you, they said, oh, the guy who wrote the book with Ringo Starr. And I said, well, there's a lot more to him than that.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay returns right after this. Welcome back to Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
Let's talk about Ringo for a second. You touched on the idea you always wanted to be a Beatle. Do you feel like you have a spot in history with the Beatles now with Ringo's book? I heard it's dynamite.
Oh, well, you know what? Let me backtrack for 1 second. I didn't write a book on Ringo. What I did was I made a documentary, which is out right now, called Beatles Stories. And I went around the world with my handheld camera, and I found people who had a story about themselves and the Beatles. Everybody from Ben Kingsley to John Voight to Henry Winkler, the Fonz, to Lucy Baines Johnson, who was the first daughter under LBJ, the president in the 60s, to many of the Beatles recording engineers and their former girlfriends. I mean, I interviewed about 80 people for Beatles Stories. It's called Beatles Stories, a Fab Four fans' ultimate road trip.
How do you scale? How do you scale something like that down? You interviewed 80 people. How do you scale it down into one film?
Well, I made it into 52 interviews are in the actual movie that's 85 minutes long, but each interview is a minute and a half, and so you're really seeing story after story. And then I took the other 30-odd interviews and put it on the bonus DVD. I put it on bonus. It's a bonus track on the not a bonus track, a bonus feature on the when you buy the DVD, which is, by the way, top 10 at Amazon right now. So I'm very proud about that. But there are many different features on the DVD, and I became a documentarian, in the mid 2000s, and Beatles Stories is kind of my love letter to the Beatles. And I just heard that Paul McCartney watched it and loved it. So I got an email from his people saying that he enjoyed it very, very much, and that was obviously very gratifying.
I hate to sound cliche, but labor of love for sure, right? That doesn't feel like work doing something like that.
Well, it was a tremendous amount of work, but it was the kind of thing where I got to meet everybody I've ever liked, or all these cultural icons. I met, I got a call from Rick Nielsen, and I was hanging out with him. He picked me up at the airport in Chicago saying, let's do an interview. I have a great Beatles story. Or I'm on the roof of, Art Garfunkel's house in Manhattan and hanging out with Brian Wilson in his recording room. And he said, no, I've got another story, and I've got another. I mean, it was absolutely unbelievable. And there I am with a handheld camera. There were no lights or makeup or anything like that. It was just very fun. And I got to, it was just me and these icons talking about the Beatles. What could be better?
Yeah, no trouble with the sound, or you just didn't care? Sound or the
I cared.
lighting?
Oh, no, I cared. But what I did is I hooked up a lavalier mic, and I also had a wireless mic. So in case one failed, I always had the other one there. And I got very lucky. It was just karmically speaking, it just all worked out. because everybody enjoyed talking about this subject, as I did.
You mentioned about numbers, and that number of 25,000 records, I just want to put it in perspective. This is your own label. This is not, like I imagine it wasn't huge production costs. That's a great number if you're selling that on your own. If you sold 25,000 with a major label, I mean, you'd get your advance, and then maybe you'd cover a little bit on it. But for your own record, it's probably like selling the equivalent of, I mean, what? You tell me. You see the numbers. Is that like selling 150,000 records? Is it higher than that?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, this came out of the blue. We didn't expect to sell nearly this many records. I figured I'd put it up there. And as I mentioned, it was my own solo records under just, my name, Seth Swirsky. They've done very well themselves. I mean, 7,000, 8,000 for my first record, Instant Pleasure. My last record, Watercolor Days, sold close to 17,000 copies. So I'm like, oh my God, wow, this is great. I think, honestly, people want to hear melodic music, and it's left us. I mean, you could turn on a radio in the 60s and in the 70s, and a lot of times in the 80s as well, and just hear melody after melody, from Simon and Garfunkel to Tears for Fears to, I mean, you just name the groups over the years. And that's left us. But it hasn't left me because it's optimistic. Who doesn't want to sing? Who doesn't want to sing to the great songs when they came on the radio? So I'm not at all comparing myself to those great artists, but I'm saying that what I do is I'm coming out of that tradition of writing kind of, pop songs that last about 2 to 3 minutes and with a lot of hooks in them, and hopefully recorded very well.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sir.
No, not at all. Not at all. So I very much, that was really the goal, to make a very consistent record. And just, I guess by chance or luck, or people told other people about it. But, before we knew it, I was just, got a distribution deal through Burnside in Oregon. And I just kept getting orders. It's like we need 500 more. We need 400. There was a guy from the distributor that called me up and said, were you just on Jay Leno or something? Because we're getting orders now for 1,200 and 1,600. I was just like, no, I guess people are just telling each other.
Yeah, it's amazing. Viral. The term is viral. It goes viral. One person plays it. I mean, in anticipation of speaking to you, I've checked out some of your music, and it's fantastic. You're a great writer. I mean, just simply, a great writer. And, a couple things come to mind. I mean, first of all, things have changed in recording. Now everyone seems to have their own Pro Tools setup and their own home studio. Are you of that ilk? Are you one of those who have a studio in their home?
I do have a studio in my home, but I'm not of that ilk. I'm of the ilk of kind of like what John Lennon did. John Lennon picked up an acoustic guitar when he was in the mood. He sat on a couch. He just felt his mood, and his mood translated, from his head down through his neck, through his shoulders, to his hands, and it manifested itself in chords on a guitar, and he sang what he felt. That's exactly what I do. I just write songs on a acoustic guitar very simply. I concentrate on the song. I don't concentrate on the sounds. It all starts with the song. And I put it down on an old tape recorder. Tape recorder you would have bought in 1975, hit record and play. I'm not a fancy guy. I don't want to know from all the latest stuff. I leave that to engineers at a studio. So when I finish a song, I go down to a real studio, and I play all the instruments on my songs anyway. So, that's a whole other type of record. That's a recording process, kind of like what McCartney did on a lot of his early records. I like doing that. But I don't do any recording right away because I notice that when I'm in the midst of a song, writing it, if I start to say, I want to start putting down this idea, I'm like turning on the power and it's not going on, and why isn't this happening and why isn't that happening? You lose all your inspiration. So I'm very much for, like, at the beginning, it's just me and an acoustic guitar and a tape recorder. Simple, real simple, and it's about the song. And then I go into the studio with a finished song and let the engineers make the sounds for the drums and for guitars and stuff like that. I do that with them, but I'm not into electronics, and I think that's where music has gone off the track. A lot of people have all the equipment in the world, but they don't know how to write songs because they're writing sound, they're writing beats, you know, and that stuff just doesn't move you. I mean, it could get you up dancing, I guess, but it doesn't make you feel anything.
Seth Swirsky is our guest today, and we're talking about music and songwriting and certainly things in and around the music business. Talking about songwriting, are you an improver? Do you improv?
In what sense?
In the writing process, do you ever turn that 1975 tape recorder on and just play and see what comes out, or are you more the inspired type? When something comes to mind, you say, "Oh, I got to get to that recorder and do it." Do you ever go?
Well,
yeah, you ever go to the studio or to just the tape recorder with nothing in mind and just see what comes out?
Well, this is how it happens for me. If I'm at a baseball game and a melody just comes into my head, I'll call my machine at, you know, my phone machine, or I'll sing it into my cell phone, and I'll do something like, "Yeah, you know that I'm going to C." I'll yell out the chord C. "Yeah, you know I'm going to A minor, blah 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 blah," and I'll know what I'm, you know, doing, so that when I get home I can actually pick up a guitar and start forming that. So if a melody pops into my head, I don't want to forget it. I'll try to get it down, and I'll yell out the chords as well, and I'll understand my own shorthand. But usually it's a mood. I have to be in a certain mood, and I never know when that mood is going to happen. Some writers write every day just to keep, you know, to keep going. That doesn't happen with me. I'll pick up a guitar when I'm in a certain mood, and I'll just start making chords, and I'll sing melodies over those chords. And if it's not happening, I put the guitar down. I don't really hammer myself too much about it. I just let it happen. It's very organic for me, like life.
Yeah, let's go back to your songwriting for other folks. It certainly laid a foundation. Do you remember your first big check that you got from writing one of your songs?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, it was amazing to me to get a staff songwriting gig at Chapel Music. You know, here's the biggest publisher in the world, based in New York.
Who signed you to that? Who was your...
Erwin Schuster. Oh. Erwin Schuster. He was a very great publishing man, and it was a tremendous compliment to be signed by him. He had taken a song of mine while I was at Dartmouth. I was still a student, and he had signed one of my songs, and he said, "I'm going to get this to Barbra Streisand. She's looking for one song for her comeback record." Here I am, 19 years old, and I was waiting. I waited by the phone every day, and he called me up and goes, "Listen, I just have to tell you, we pitched your song, but you were beaten out by Andrew Lloyd Webber." and that didn't affect me. I was kind of happy. I mean, yeah. I thought, okay, I know I can play in the big leagues, and that's who I was up against. Great. It really let me know that I could play. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
That gave me a lot of confidence at that time. My first big check, I think, was I had a couple of hits with Taylor Dayne. A number of other artists were doing my songs, and I got, you know, I was re-signed to what was then Warner Chappell. Warner had taken over Chapel Music, and, you know, they wrote me a check for, I guess, I don't know, $125,000,
sure,
which was a tremendous amount of money in the 80s. I mean, certainly I was, you know, in my 20s, and, you know, they said, "We want to give you an advance on the songs you're going to write." So I was obviously thrilled about that. An interesting story, I wasn't sure I was going to re-sign with them. Here I was having these hit records, and I was out to dinner with the president of the company and some other people from Warner Chappell, and they said, "We really want you to re-sign with us. What's it going to take?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, you know, other companies are coming after me, and you know, it's all good. Give me a week, you know, to figure it out." And a woman from Warner Chappell whispered in my ear, we're out at dinner in L.A. She said, "George Harrison is having dinner upstairs. Would you like me to introduce you?" And I said, if you introduce me to George Harrison, I'll sign this napkin that you put down. You could write any number you want in it.
Yeah.
So she takes me upstairs, and she says, "George Harrison, Seth Swirsky." So I said, "Hi, George. How are you?" You know, trying to keep my cool. And he says, "How are you?" And I said, "Oh, great." I said, "I was listening to your song, 'I Need You,' today around the pool, because I was out in L.A. I was living in New York, but I was out in L.A. And he goes, "Oh, wasn't that from The Help?" I said, "Well, I think it was called Help. I don't know if it was called The Help." You know, it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we're on the charts at the same time. My song, Tell It to My Heart, and you've got your song, Got My Mind Set on You. He goes, oh, yes, I know your song very well. And so I couldn't believe that. And he goes, let me introduce you to the guys around the table. He says, this is Tom and Roy and Jeff and Bobby. And there I was meeting the Traveling Wilburys before they ever were a band.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And then we parted ways. I couldn't believe it. I signed my contract. I came back to L.A. 2 weeks later because Tell It to My Heart was up for a Grammy Award, and I decided to go to the closing party early. And I'm there at this party. I was there early. There are 10 people there. It wasn't filled up at all at that point. It was very early, and I see up in the front, I see George Harrison. I just met him 2 weeks before, so I start to walk toward him. He turns around and he says, Seth. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, my God, he remembers my name? Are you kidding? So we got into this great conversation, and then I said, listen, George, what are you doing on Friday? You want to write a song? And he says, oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. He goes, I'm writing with Bobby on Friday, and then I'm going back to England. And I'm thinking, I'm being turned down for Bob Dylan. A Harrison Dylan song. And it didn't matter to me. It's just that I asked the Beatle if he wanted to write a song, the great George Harrison. And I later recounted that story to Olivia Harrison, and she was so pleased because it really showed who George was, the fact that he could remember my name. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he's met millions of people.
Yeah, well,
he's such a great and warm guy.
That's an amazing story. But, you mentioned, about Andrew Lloyd Webber losing out to him and then losing out to Bob Dylan.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay returns right after this. Welcome back to Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
Talking as if you're flattered, but the truth of the matter is you're in different company when things like that happen. And you said, I didn't even care that I lost out to Andrew Lloyd Webber. I just know that it's happening. But the truth of the matter, and again, hopefully some of our listeners are taking some of this in and they're, have careers of their own. But when that happens, I mean, in reality, you're getting close. You're getting close to something major. And in the case of Tell It to My Heart, rather, when that's happening, you're in the big leagues. You're in the big leagues.
Yes. I believe that you should always look at the things that you have done and do have, not at the things that passed you by or the things that you didn't succeed in, because it's all part of one thing. I consider myself very, very, very lucky that I'm even in this business, that I've had songs out there that people appreciate them. Some people have bought them. Some people write me an email. Whatever project I'm doing, this Beatles Stories documentary, I'm thrilled to get emails from people to share these things. Failures or things that don't happen don't really faze me. They don't bother me because the only thing that bothers me is when I go to bed at night and I think, did I do everything I could to make this happen? If I feel like I did every possible thing that I could, then I go to bed happy. I really do, because then it's just in the fate of the gods, So I'm not bitter about anything. I'm always living at the moment. You know what I mean? I'm never looking behind and saying, if that only happened. I just try to say, hey, that was a neat experience for what it was. Not if only that had happened, then this would have happened. I'm just grateful for what is.
We're with Seth Swirsky, our special guest today. Seth, let me ask you, what was the turning point in your career, or if you prefer, what was the turning point in your life?
Oh, well, the turning point in my life, I guess, was being brought up by two fantastic people, my mother and father, who are thankfully alive today, and just great, great people. I can't really think of anything really bigger than that. I know you're probably looking for a moment in my music career, my documentary, or, I've written 3 books as well on baseball. So that was something that was fun as well in the 90s and early 2000s. But no, I think it was just being fortunate to be raised by 2 fantastic parents.
At the time of Tell It to My Heart, as soon as that starts breaking, how does your life change? In other words, and again, there's no internet at that point. There's no cell phones. I don't even know if there were beepers at that time. But does your phone start ringing? Did you have an agent? Did you have a creative director? Who did you have, and how did your life and that person's life change once you had that hit?
Well, I had a publisher, and they act as an agent for your songs. And what happened was when that song came out, I didn't know what was going to happen with it. You know, it started breaking in the Miami and San Francisco market. Nobody knew who Taylor Dayne was at the time. She wasn't even signed to a label. She wasn't even signed to Arista Records. We sold 1 million copies of just the 12-inch at the time because that's all people could buy.
Did you know her through Rick Wake? Is that where you met her?
No. Oh, I met her later after Rick had recorded the song. I didn't even know Rick. Some guy knocked on my door and said, "I've got this demo I want to play you of the song I did." And it was, you know, it was obviously very exciting. But it broke in Miami and San Francisco, and all of a sudden it started playing on the New York stations and then MTV, and it was all over the place. I mean, it was crazy and so much fun. And what was really fun about it was I could walk into restaurants, and when it was played as background music, I would look over at a table and I would see people mouthing the words. And I would, you know, and I would think, I remember where I wrote those words. I was in my green chair at my parents' house, and I wasn't living at my parents' house at the time, but I just happened to be there that weekend when I wrote that. And that was very gratifying, but I will tell you, it's not like because you have a hit record, you are guaranteed, you know, people are knocking at your door for the next one. I wrote her follow-up hit as well,
Prove Your Love,
as I mentioned. And, you know, in the music business, it's really about what have you done for me lately. It's your last song, in a way. You know, everybody's looking at, okay, you know, certainly doors opened, more doors open, but it wasn't, you know, people are still looking for that song. Nobody is putting out a song because your name is on it. Nobody's buying a song because you wrote it. You know, it's about the song. If you understand what I'm saying.
No doubt about it. I mean, you could just ask a lot of the big songwriters and artists from the past. I mean, there are, you know, I don't want to single anybody out. It'll sound like I'm taking a shot at one of these legends, but you have legendary singer-songwriters who haven't had a hit in years, and you wonder to yourself, and it's a good question for you: did they dry up? Did they burn out? Did the market just change? Did the audience just change? I mean, what happens in a situation like? And again, I want to stop short of singling somebody out, but you know the concept, right? You know.
Of course, I totally know what you're saying. I think that people do what they do best, and it's very, very difficult to just, you know, change to fit the times. If you change to fit the times, you'll never. It's not honest, and people pick that up. You know. You can't be what you're not. And so people that wrote songs, you know, that really fit a 60s vibe or something like that, they just weren't going to have success in the 90s when rap music and other things really kind of were the genre, you know, that took over.
Yeah, but
so I think
what happened? Yeah, what happens though? You think that? I mean, that's as good an explanation as I've ever heard. I guess is that you know, people you know, are in the times, and you know, somebody in the 60s that can write hits, you know, might not match up, but certainly some music doesn't change all that much. For example, how much different is Taylor Dayne than let's say Pink, or you know, Taylor Dayne or Cyndi Lauper for that matter? Yeah.
Sure, that's why Tell It to My Heart has been recorded by 5 or 6 different recording artists since it came out originally. You know, it's just been, it keeps getting re-recorded. So that's wonderful. My song that I wrote for Al Green, Love It's a Beautiful Thing, which was,
big hit. That was a big hit.
The theme song in Legally Blonde, the movie, was a theme song of 2 Weeks' Notice. That movie, it's been the theme song of 5 different movies. Most songs, if they're the theme song even of one movie, they never get picked up by other movies because, you know, a movie likes to have its own, you know, its own theme. But that was the theme song of many different movies, and it was the Revlon picked it up as their, you know, their major campaign, you know, for their products in the 2000s. So I think songs, you know, certain songs, they do last, and I really do believe that melody is the key. I really do. A lot of people think it's the sound or the vibe, And that's all important to the singer. Very important stuff, no question about it. But melody, to me, is the makes songs great. That's why the Beatles last.
We could speak to you for hours. I mean, you're a fascinating conversation. And, I just want to ask you, in closing, what do you go from here? What do you do? What's your next step?
Well, I'm getting a degree. I'm getting my master's degree in clinical psychotherapy right now. I'm doing a lot of painting. Hopefully I'll have a show of my paintings over the next year. I'm making my third solo record. If people want to check out my last solo record, I do think they'd like it. It's called Watercolor Day, and my band, The Red Button. And I'm very, very happy that I'm out promoting my DVD, Beatles Stories, which is, if you like the Beatles, I'm telling you, you're going to like the movie. So it's a lot of, I just enjoy making things, Frank. It's very enjoyable for me to wake up every day and think, okay, what's next? It's a fun life, actually. And people can check out everything that I do at my website, Seth.com, if I can mention that.
Just once again, it's Seth.com?
Yeah.
Wow, how did you get that? Wow, that's
I just got it. It just happened. I don't know anybody. I didn't, I wasn't there in 1992 or anything like that. It just occurred,
You got some pretty famous Seths out there. Seth Green, Seth MacFarlane, that's pretty damn good, let me tell you. Seth Swirsky, you've been a great guest, and thanks for being here.
My total pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and it was a real honor to talk with you.
Thank you. And when you're in New York, maybe we could shoot a TV show with you. We're speaking via phone right now, and for those who didn't hear it, Seth.com. Hear more about Seth Swirsky, and he's a Renaissance man, and he's an amazing talent. Thank you all for tuning in, and please go to Seth.com and check this man out. A brilliant, brilliant artist. Seth, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank all of you for listening. We'll be back next time on Turning Point.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay was produced by Out of the Box Studios in Bohemia, New York. Executive producers Frank MacKay, Harry Oates, and Bart Pellegrino. Director of Operations Corey Arnold. Segment producer and talent coordinator Kristen McKay. Audio and studio engineers Francis Kazmarek and Tom Shazam. Studio support Mark Harwood, Pete Galgano, Brian Hunt, Danielle Altabrando, Keith Withers, and Chris Luna. Sound mixing and mastering Daniel Joseph. Hotel accommodations provided by Ohika Castle Hotel and Estate in Huntington, New York. Transportation services provided by Mark of Elegance Limousine in Hauppauge, New York. Catering services provided by Windows on the Lake in Ronkonkoma, New York.